But Whirl, if you're having trouble learning about how to read people, it's probably because you're not really focusing on learning things on a base enough level. I'll explain. So what you need to do is start looking at literally everything your opponent does. For instance, did they move backwards at a particular moment? If so, did they move backwards while also doing something else? When they typically press that particular button, is there something that they are often doing as a response to them pressing that button? Just try and find as many associated actions and moments that you can attribute to an action in order to get a better idea of what they're doing in general and why. When and when doesn't Falcon want to go for PS2 for a starter stage? To be honest, over time, I'm starting to think that Falcon generally doesn't want to go there. Like, the more and more I play on that stage, the more and more I think Falcon would rather just go to Town and City. Why would I prefer Town and City versus PS2? PS2's size and layout just fosters camping. The more and more I play, the more and more I realize that Falcon almost always wants to approach in a lot of the matchups where you would end up going to PS2 in the first place. And then you're just choosing a stage that makes it easier for your opponents to camp you out. Town and City platforms are at a height where they don't really help with that. Also, Town and City's layout is just way better for Falcon. I'm really starting to think that Pokemon Stadium is a below average stage for Falcon. I was also reminded last night that as much as I love the MCU, Batman the Dark Knight is probably still the best comic book movie ever made. Christopher Nolan's an amazing actor, and then... or a director, my mistake. And then everything involving Heath Ledger is just... it's just... transcendent. I feel like Heath Ledger's Joker is legitimately a contender for the best acting I've seen literally ever. Lady Lindis, if I could remove rock rocking, I would do it by just dramatically reducing the end lag on Falcon's up B, but only when he lands it. This way, he wouldn't get anything out of it. He just wouldn't die for landing a move consistently. Go commit high jump. In that set, I also just lost games 2 and 3 in really stupid and tragic ways. Games 2 and 3 I lost so tragically. Nairo beat me because Nair traded and I just fell out and died. Sadness. Sadness! Yeah, I think Falcon and ZSS have a lot in common actually. Except ZSS is the better of the two. It was that way in Smash 4 too, funnily enough. And now it's just that way again. It was worth. My preferred starter stages as Falcon are probably like Battlefield, Smashville, and Town. The most hype set I've ever played, Lady Lindis, would have to be probably my set with Nairo at Civil War. Got him. I don't think Falcon is high tier, sadly. But I think if you fix this movement, he'd be close to the high tier. That's by far the biggest thing he needs, Lord Vapor. He has a few other things that you look at on paper and you're like, why is that a thing? But if you took away those, he'd be fine. Like, sometimes jab 1 won't probably connect into jab 2, and he'll literally get whip punished and die for it, which obviously is not the greatest. But it doesn't happen too often, so it's not that big of a deal. Also, his up tilt has a weird problem where the leg is intangible, I guess, to make it function, you know, like a traditional anti-air. And you can tell when they wrote an in-game tip on the move that clearly describes it to be used as an anti-air. So you can tell that that's what the intended use of the move is, as an anti-air, you know? But for whatever reason, sure, the leg is intangible, but his arm literally runs alongside it and has a hurt box to where, sure, the leg doesn't get hit, but then it just hits his arm for some reason. Like, why is that there? Got him! With the Velveeta cheese. Delicious. That was on Gluto. Amazing player. I think he's top 10, but he just hasn't attended enough or whatever. PGR is so biased towards American players. Nick C's Falcon is... I think he's more instinctual than I am. And I'm more about conditioning. So I was on the way back home from North Carolina on this Greyhound bus. And the first half of the trip, I ended up next to... I want to say he was like some kind of drug dealer. Dude was nuts. Like, he was muttering to himself the whole time, and he had 2 briefcases. One of them was literally full of ganja, and he was making blunts literally right there next to me. This dude did not care. And some of it spilled onto me, and I was just like... But since they had assigned seating and you couldn't move, I was just like trying to quietly hope no one would notice, because then I'd end up getting associated. Anyway, half of the trip goes through, and thankfully, I don't somehow get dragged into anything, even though it looked like I might have for a second. But the second half of the trip is where she gets involved. And by she, I'm referring to this lady that I want to say she's like in her 40s. But she looked nice for her 40s, not gonna lie. So what ended up happening was I got really hungry during the pit stop, which the other guy got off on. And there was nothing within walking distance to eat, except Hooters to go. So I decided, well, clearly I've got no other options, so I'm gonna go to Hooters and get some food to go so I can take it back on the bus, you know? Reasonable enough, considering I was hungry, they didn't have food on the bus, and it was my only option. So, I get my food, and there's this lady next to my assigned spot, and she has to let me in. And she makes a comment about me coming back from Hooters, like, oh, so you're one of those guys, right? And I'm not, so I wanted to clarify to her, no, I am not one of those guys. Somehow that ends up spurring a conversation about some other random stuff I can't remember. And then we actually end up talking pretty much the entire bus ride. Just normal stuff. She ends up talking about her family, more specifically, her husband and her kids, and she shows me some pictures of them. I was like, okay, you've got a nice family. And then, while she's showing me pictures of her family, she accidentally scrolls over some nudes and giggles. And she's like, oops. Giggles and then slots away. But after that, she was actually talking about, she had a bus ride somewhere else in the morning. I think it was New Orleans or something. She's like, man, so I don't have a hotel room. Can I stay with you for the night? after accidentally showing me those nudes, and I was like, oh no, I could be a home wrecker right now. So I was like, if I really wanted to be the ultimate grime lord, I could give those kids a new sibling real quick. But I decided not to.